Indoor air quality, IAQ, why is it important? Many of you students will be graduating soon, and you'll be making applications at different employers. When you do that, you're gonna land in maybe one of three places. An installer, installing indoor air quality products, a maintenance technician, installing and teaching clients about indoor air quality products, or maybe even a service technician, that you show up to a home that has a non-working AC, but they have an underlying indoor air quality issue. So this is what indoor air quality is. It's very important. It's crucial you learn this because your employers will be looking for you to know this. So we start with the facts. Indoor air quality. What is it? Indoor air quality starts with ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet light is one of the lights that keeps systems clean. Now, there are 4 microbes that cause illness to humans, and that is bacteria, virus, parasite, and mold. Mold is the deadliest as it releases a secondary byproduct that is called mycotoxins. Mycotoxins are the only element small enough to go through the wall of the lung directly in the bloodstream. So let us learn how every air conditioner you're going to come across has the potential to have an indoor air quality issue. And that starts with the air handler. We look here, and we have here our basic air handler. We need to understand the anatomy of the air handler. Whether it's in a closet, in an attic, in a garage, air handler is basically a fan that drags hot air from inside the house and through the ductwork. There's a coil here. Our evaporator coil that we learn about is where the hot air from the house releases its humidity. So for mold to live, it needs air, water, and food. We'll start with the evaporator coil. We can see that the evaporator coil goes from left to right, and then from front to back of the entire air handler unit. This means that no air, hot air, can get to the top where it's cold without going through the coil. Sometimes folks think that air conditioning makes air cold. No, air conditioning removes humidity from the air. Humidity and temperature connected. You remove humidity and the temperature drops as well. That's why every air conditioner has a drain pan that the coil sits in. It's got a hole in the middle so the air to come through. And every air conditioner is going to have a drain line that's dripping outside 24/7 as long as the unit is in cooling mode. So that's a source of life. We have water. So where do we get air from? This air handler is basically a box with a fan and the coil. The fan motor is spinning, circulating the air in the home, and pulling air and food into the evaporator coil. So we have air, we have water. Well, what's food? Food is very easy to get into the air conditioner. Food is anything that gets through the filter. Dust, dirt, cat hair, pet dander, anything that gets through the filter or anything that enters the coil because the filter is gone. So when you have air, water, and food, that's what mold needs to live. You have hot, humid air entering the evaporator coil to have its humidity removed. It's bringing food particles into the coil. Now, what you'll notice about this coil is it's a thick coil. It's not thin. It's almost like the radiator of a car. It's got the underside of the coil and then the top side. Air comes up through the bottom and it makes contact initially with the bottom side of the coil. This is where the magic happens. Only at this part of the coil is where you will have the air, water, and food all making contact at the same time. Some folks think I have mold in my ducts. Well, that's impossible because there's only air in the ducts. You have mold, it's at the coil because that's where the air, water, and food is. So you give anything air, water, and food, and it's going to be alive. You give anything air, water, and food, it's going to poop. The secondary byproduct of mold are mycotoxins. So when you have mold that's living on this coil, it releases its mycotoxins onto the fan blade, into the motor, and into the ductwork. Here we have the cold air and the rigid fiberboard duct system. This is a very typical duct system you'll see. It's all fiberboard, it's all rigid, no flex duct, which means that the inside of this board is completely porous, every square inch. That's why it's important to protect this. So we'll call this a brand new system air handler, brand new rigid duct system. How do we protect it? by installing a UV light here at the coil. The way UV light works is UV light is so low on the end of the light spectrum, the UV light shines through the cell wall of the four microbes, bacteria, virus, parasite, mold, breaks the replicating DNA, doesn't let it reproduce. As long as you have a UV light at the bottom side of this coil, nothing can live to put all of the mycotoxins into the ductwork or the fan motor. So what happens if you don't have a UV light? If you don't have a UV light, or say it's not in the right spot, what's going to happen is the mold is going to live and it's going to deposit its mycotoxins into the fiberboard. Excuse me. When we have mycotoxins in the fiberboard, you'll never get it out. Now, the location of the UV light is everything also. In the air handler, all the electrical portions are up here. Many technicians, they don't know that it needs to be at the bottom of the coil. They will simply install it right here next to the fan motor on a magnet. Because it's a lot easier to plug it in here and put it in here than to run the wire all the way down through the system, drill a hole perhaps, and put the tube in. The UV light has to be at the bottom side of the coil because that is where the air, water, and food initially make contact. So, this is a brand new system. Let's take a look at the same system 3 to 5 years later. Maybe on a maintenance, maybe on a no cool. Capacitor went down, not cooling, and then you go ahead and take a look inside, excuse me, and let's see what's happened in these years. Now, what we can see is this is the same system. We have now mycotoxins that have infested the fiberboard ductboard. There's cold air coming out because you turned it back on, you changed the capacitor, but there's also mycotoxins mixed with it. When you look underneath the coil, you'll see now that it's black, it's covered with food. This is the mold that's been living because it's been running maybe 3-5 years without a filter. Very common, especially in rental units. Most folks just don't know what the filter's for. So when we look here, we'll see that the bottom side of the coil is where all the food is. The top side is still relatively clean because the coil is about that thick. The food can only get on the bottom because air is being drawn in through the bottom. So that's why the UV light cannot be up here. Must be at the coil, must be underneath. So the fan motor is full of mycotoxins. The inside cabinet full of mycotoxins. The ductwork is now full of mycotoxins. The underside of the coil is full of food and flourishing mold producing mycotoxins. We have a problem. How do we rectify it? How do we fix this? This is where indoor air quality comes in. How does indoor air quality work? Let's take a look at the UV light. The UV light gets its power because it sits on the light spectrum. This is our light spectrum. This is visible light. This is light we can see. Microwave, infrared rays, the color spectrum. As we go lower, we gain more power. There is ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet rays are so low on the light spectrum. They're right next to X-rays. The power of the UV light is one step down from an X-ray, which can actually penetrate the human to see inside. One step down from gamma rays. Gamma rays only produce when stars collide. UV light is so low on the light spectrum, this gives the UV light the energy and power to shine through the cell wall of the four microbes, bacteria, virus, parasite, mold. UV light breaks the replicating DNA of the four microbes. To be effective, excuse me, the UV light must be installed under the evaporator coil, where the air, water, and food meet. That's non-negotiable. Upon mycotoxic infestation like this, there are steps to remediate. First thing you want to do is you want to chemically clean the evaporator coils. We can get up underneath there, or sometimes we have to pull the complete coil out. It's only a 3-year-old system. It's worth saving. If it was 8, 9, maybe 12 years old, maybe it's time to think of a replacement. But you'll find some units that someone just moved in, and they didn't realize the people that lived there before had 3 dogs. Never changed the filter, never had a filter. So we're going to pull and chemically clean this coil. We're going to pull the blower motor out. It's going to be sanitized. The squirrel cage is going to be pulled off the motor shaft itself, sanitized. We're going to sanitize the inside of the actual air handler. Sometimes you even need to take all the insulation fiberglass out and reline it. Next, what we're going to do is we need to remove every inch of rigid infested ductboard. That's all of this ductboard. We said earlier this was rigid ductboard. It's porous inside. It's impossible to clean mycotoxins off this. There are some people that say they can just, put a light here or put a spray here and they clean the duct system. You got to be very careful because you don't want to give a client, a sense of, oh, well, we'll just spray something in the ducts and it'll be clean. With rigid fiberboard, it all has to come out. This has mycotoxins in it. This isn't going anywhere. And when I say every inch of it, we mean sometimes you'll come up on a job and say, this is in the closet, this is in the attic. And somebody replaced the ductwork, but they left this riser original. Yeah, they cut all this off, they cut this off, and they added ducts, but they still left a piece of fiberboard here, full of mycotoxins. That's gonna go ahead and reinfest the rest of the system. The UV light must be installed again after it's sanitized at the bottom of the coil. At every evaporator coil, always underneath. Now, a couple safety tips. I don't want to send you out there in the field knowing why and how. You need practicality. First off, never expose your eyes to UV light. Never. It's very tempting. You install it here, the panels are off, you turned it on, the light's shining out. This light will cause temporary blindness. It's not instant. Happened to me in 2005. Had the panel off, doing some zip ties. The light was on. I didn't realize it. My exposure time was maybe 90 seconds. Didn't feel it. About 8 hours later, the back of my eyes dried out to the point because it dried the retinas out. There's a slight level of radiation in these rays. We're right underneath X-rays and below gamma rays. So never expose your eyes to UV light, even for 2 to 5 seconds. You always turn off the air handler before you take the panels off. You want to replace the bulbs every 18 months. It's not so much that the bulbs go out, it's that the bulbs get cloudy. And when they get cloudy, the UV rays just bounce off the bulb. At that point, it's just a nightlight. Always check with the new employers for their indoor air quality procedures. Every company is different. Some companies are so big, they have so many clients that they don't use the word mold. They can't. They use a word like growth. Something different. And the reason this happens is because say you come up to, you just started for a company, you come up and you find a situation like this. And you tell the client, hey, you have mycotoxins, you have mold on your coil, but you don't realize that one of your other technicians or someone you work with was just there a year ago. And then that homeowner is going to be like, well, you guys were here a year ago, you didn't tell me. This is how lawsuits happen. So wherever you land, you always want to check with your new employer for their indoor air quality procedures. It's very, very crucial that you guys grasp and understand why we need indoor air quality. It's very important because it's going to be the future. We don't use filters to clean air anymore. We use UV lights. UV lights is a very simple one tube. There are many other products that are sold, but it all starts with a UV light at the coil. And this is your indoor air quality.